Libraries are... Libraries are great, especially for us history nerds for whom books are a great escapism from the outside world, which is uncertain and scary to us because, well, we don't know how it ends yet. For the benefit of my younger viewers, libraries are where we used to store information and things to read in the age before the internet, back when if you wanted to read something you needed a physical copy of it. And one of history's most iconic libraries is the one that used to exist in the Egyptian city of Alexandria back during antiquity. It was thought to be the storehouse of all of the ancient world's knowledge, and had everything from poetry to scientific treatises to mathematics to plays to histories. It was awesome. And how the Alexandrians came to be the keepers of all the ancient world's knowledge is actually pretty interesting. The library was built by the Ptolemaic dynasty, who were Macedonian Greek nobles who styled themselves kings of Egypt after the death of Alexander the Great, who had of course conquered the country. And the Ptolemies were a pretty competitive bunch, so they went to great lengths to ensure that their library was the best in the ancient world. They sent scholars out on missions around the Mediterranean, trying to find works and books and things to copy down or purchase at great cost and bring back to Alexandria. They would also search any ship that came through their harbour for precious works, copy them, and then keep the original whilst giving the original owner a copy. The library also acted kind of like a meeting place for all of the most best and brilliant minds of the ancient world, where scholars, philosophers and artists could meet and together come up with new ideas. And they did some amazing things with this. My personal favourite achievement of this era of Alexandrian history is that of Eratosthenes, who was a Greek fellow working in Alexandria, who measured the circumference of the earth in the 2nd century BCE. And he did this by measuring shadows at different points of Egypt. So he could see that there was a curvature towards the sun, and then he could kind of extrapolate out to measure the Earth's circumference with a fair degree of accuracy as well, which is just a wonderful example of how intelligent and resourceful ancient people could be, and also a great way of shutting people up when they try to tell you that the people of the past believed the Earth to be flat. Nobody knows how many works the Great Library stored, but some estimates go as high as like 400,000 scrolls. That's scrolls, not books, because they didn't have bound books in Alexandria like we have them today. They had scrolls of papyrus, papyrus is like a grass, like a reed that grows everywhere in Egypt, and they made paper out of it. It's actually where we get our word paper from nowadays. Paper, papyrus. Anyways, they had loads of these. And if we still had the contents of this library, who knows what amazing things it would reveal to us. But sadly we don't. The ancient Library of Alexandria is lost to us, and very few of its works survive. And this really is an enormous tragedy. It is a great loss to human history. I'd go so far as to say that if you asked all of the ancient history buffs in the world what one thing from the ancient world they wish survived, the Library of Alexandria would probably be the most popular response. People have even said that the loss of the Alexandrian library set back human development by 1,000 years, which is, probably not true. The library definitely had some cool stuff in it, but hey, the Romans had access to a lot of it, and they didn't invent a submarine or land on the moon or anything like that. It's probably a bit silly to reckon that there's some kind of ancient key to technology that existed in the library. But what we have lost are some incredible primary sources and written evidence for what life was like in the ancient world that the library was a part of. And that would be invaluable to us historians because it would help us understand these ancient people so much better. And that is the point of history. So what happened to the library at Alexandria? Well, that's a little bit of a mystery, and it's one that we're going to have a look at the potential answers for over the next however long this video takes. So let's go. We're not actually in a library, by the way. That bit earlier where someone told me to shush, that was fake. This is my flat. And these books, they're all mine. This is my bookshelf. So let's have a quick look at the history of the Library of Alexandria and see if we can identify the culprit in its destruction. So like I said, the Library of Alexandria was constructed by kings of Egypt who descended from Alexander the Great's general Ptolemy. It was probably finished during the reign of his son Ptolemy II, and during the reigns of the first few Ptolemies, it grew to be the largest and most prestigious educational academic institution in the entire ancient world. We call these kings the Ptolemies, by the way, because in this dynasty, they are basically all called Ptolemy. So generally speaking, the Ptolemaic dynasty of Egypt gets worse as time goes on. The first three Ptolemies are the ones who build the library and see it become so successful, and they're pretty good. Then the middle Ptolemies, they start to get a bit crap, and by the end they're just a murderous gang of squabbling inbred freaks, and it's just a disaster, it's a catastrophe by the end. Egypt's in shambles. And as Egypt gets less stable and less prosperous, the Library of Alexandria begins to suffer as well. The civil wars and bloody purges of Ptolemy VIII specifically really mark the end of the library's kind of golden age, of its high point. Lots of scholars are killed during his reign, and those that aren't killed flee to other parts of the Mediterranean and deprive the library of some of its best minds. Now, this was certainly a huge blow to the library's prestige, but it wasn't the end. I mean, there may be fewer important scholars in Alexandria, but the thousands of scrolls which the library housed, they aren't destroyed yet. So we can't blame the library's destruction on the Ptolemies. If you ask most people who's responsible for the burning of the Library of Alexandria, they will point to my boy, Julius Caesar. In 48 BCE, Julius Caesar was engaged in a big civil war with a fellow Roman general called Pompey. And Caesar had gotten the upper hand in this war, so Pompey fled to Egypt, hoping to find help. But the Egyptians, who really wanted to curry favour with Caesar, decided to execute Pompey. And this led to a whole load of drama. Caesar had to click pause on his own civil war to get involved in an Egyptian one. Ptolemy XIII, who was the king of Egypt, was engaged in a bit of a power struggle with his older sister Cleopatra over who would get to rule the country. Caesar stepped in as mediator and sided with Cleopatra because hot, over her brother Ptolemy because not, and Ptolemy responded by besieging Julius Caesar in the palace of Alexandria, the poor guy. So how did our man Caesar escape? Why, he started a fire, of course, and it's this fire that many say consumed the Library of Alexandria. And so we have our culprit. Caesar was the one who burned the library, or at least some of it, because we know that the library continued to exist long after Julius Caesar was around. So he can't have gotten the whole thing. Maybe he just burned a portion of it. I mean, only like 2 decades after Julius Caesar, the geographer Strabo is in Alexandria, and he reports that the museum there is still an operating scholarly complex, suggesting that if Caesar did set it on fire, the fire didn't get particularly far. This isn't to defend Caesar too much. I mean, he still probably did set fire to quite a bit of valuable stuff. I'm just saying that the library, though reduced in prestige, did survive him. Our next possible time of destruction is the 3rd century CE. Alexandria was a part of the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire at this time is in crisis, undergoing basically constant civil wars. And Alexandria has a little bit of a bad habit of picking the wrong side in these civil wars. The Roman emperors Aurelian and Diocletian both end up marching on the city, though from my own research I can't find any hint that their attacks on Alexandria led to the destruction of any library there. Nevertheless, the 3rd century does seem to mark a pretty serious decline for whatever remained of the Alexandrian school. In the 260s, membership to the museum, which was the scholarly complex of which the library was sort of a part, ceased. And that must have been a real blow to scholarly life in Alexandria. Nevertheless, we know that it didn't stop completely, because remnants of it are still visible as late as the 4th and 5th centuries CE, when Christianity was sweeping the Roman Empire. One of Alexandria's most famous scholars ever resided there at this point. Hypatia was a Neoplatonist philosopher who brought students from all around the empire to learn with her. However, what might have been a revival of Alexandria's status as the hub of wisdom, innovation, and knowledge in the ancient world coincided with an era of great tensions in Egypt. The growing Christian population was becoming increasingly radical, and they didn't accept reminders of their pagan past. In 391, a mixture of Roman soldiers and a Christian mob destroyed the Serapeion of Alexandria, a huge temple complex which was as old as the library itself, and which the library was likely attached to. A few years later, the Jewish population of Egypt was expelled, and then finally in 415, Hypatia herself was lynched by a Christian mob. Now, Hypatia's death wasn't the end for all philosophy and science in the city of Alexandria, but her murder did shock people, and the destruction of so much of the classical city probably took with it most of the remaining remnants of the library and the institution of which it was a part. There is one final potential culprit for the destruction of the Library of Alexandria, if indeed any of it still survived, and that is the Muslim Caliph Omar, under whom Muslim forces conquered Egypt in 642 CE. Omar was the successor to Abu Bakr, who was the guy who took the reins leading the faithful after the death of the Prophet Muhammad. There is a story that after his armies conquered Egypt, the Caliph went in, saw the library and said, either all of these scrolls agree with the Quran, in which case we don't need them because we have the Quran, or they disagree with the Quran, in which case they must be destroyed. So did the Muslim conquest put the final nail in the coffin at the Library of Alexandria? Maybe. I mean, it's a pretty difficult story to verify, this one of Omar coming in and burning things. It doesn't really appear until about 500 or 600 years after the event, and most modern scholars are pretty skeptical of it. So, when did the library disappear? Did it decline along with the Ptolemaic dynasty? Yeah, almost certainly, but it didn't destroy it. Was it burned by Caesar? Well, yeah, some of it probably was, but certainly not all of it, because we know that future emperors, less than 100 years after Caesar, are adding to the library, and you don't add to something that isn't there anymore, you rebuild it or renovate it. Did it perish during the tumultuous 3rd century crisis? Well, yeah, quite possibly. This is the era when paid membership to the museum ceases, which really does suggest that there wasn't really much of a reason to study in Alexandria anymore. Or was it the rise of Christianity and then later Islam that sealed the library's fate? Yeah, maybe. But to be honest, I think the Library of Alexandria died a slow death. I don't think that there was one single climactic event that engulfed the thing in flames. I think it just declined in prestige, stopped being used for periods of time, wasn't funded properly. Maybe there was the occasional fire or city sacking, and eventually it just kind of rotted away. And it was probably rebuilt and renovated pretty regularly. Even if there is a library in Alexandria, when do we say that the library stopped existing? I mean, there's still a library in Alexandria nowadays. They've rebuilt it. It's a really nice building. I was there about a week ago. And yeah, it's great. They've got a really good website. And there's a chance that all of that lost knowledge isn't permanently lost. Archaeologists and historians find things all of the time. Who knows? Maybe the sands of Egypt still hold some of that precious papyri just waiting to be discovered. Fingers crossed for that, but I wouldn't hold out too much hope. Ideas, knowledge, and especially ideas and knowledge written on thin reeds hammered together into a type of paper are fragile things, easy to lose and difficult to preserve. There is a fairly good chance that the contents of the Library of Alexandria is permanently lost to us, which, I don't know, try not to get too upset about that. Instead, try and find some joy in the fact that so much from the ancient world has survived against the odds to this modern day so that we can learn from it, which is pretty great. It's pretty great that we have anything at all. Thanks for watching. Didn't know how to end that one. There's not much to say. Bye.